He stands, he pled guilty. He stands before the court today on child abuse in the first degree, which is punishable up to life in prison or any other determined sentence of years.
Judge, this case makes no sense to anybody. There is no gain for her from this.
I had one before, and then after I graduated from an alternative school early, I started a second one that was by my biological father's demands, basically.
Okay. Have you talked to him at all recently, biological father? Does he know what's going on? Or?
I don't think quite yet. Last time we talked to him was last week.
Okay.
He and my stepmother got a divorce.
So callous and so cold that they just defy explanation. And I convinced myself that the only thing that could make any sense is that on some level, she had stopped thinking of her children as human beings.
What is your relationship like with him? I mean, do you associate with him at all or not really?
Not really. I found out that a lot of what he's told me about my biological mother up here was nothing more than blatant lies.
Okay.
He said that she didn't care for me, that she never wanted to see me, which were both lies. It was just, he's a control freak.
I personally look at it through my own lens, and I say he tag teamed along with his mother in the starvation mode and also in torture methods. A hot sauce, the video I sent to the judge, the wall sits, the chasing, the ice baths, the handcuffs, the zip ties. I mean, the laundry list goes long. It's long and horrific to listen to.
What were these lists for in the first place?
Sneaking food over and over and over. We've tried everything. We were nice. We tried different consequences, but we just couldn't ever listen.
What were some of the other types of consequences? Like prior to like, are we talking like?
We did take away his devices.
Okay.
The mother had to say this to him too as a child growing up, and so he's just parroting what she's been saying all along, and in her mind is unnecessary.
I mean, from what I saw, it sounds like you're compassionate and that you cared about him, and you sent some pictures that were like, he's looking too skinny and we need to feed him. And, you know, there's sometimes you get frustrated, but at the end of the day, you kept coming back to caring. But the end result of that, he passed away, right? And he passed away from not eating food.
Used to be the standard was the guidelines. The guidelines take into consideration all the elements. I don't think they would take into consideration the amount of absolute systematic, consistent torture that you engaged in here.
Something broke. We wouldn't be here. Something broke.
Are you ready to deal with the consequences, whether it's good or bad? Every action has a reaction. Every decision you make has consequences. Okay? Stop making excuses.
Yeah. Amen to that, Ed. Amen to that.
Court is exceeding guidelines in this case. The court finds that the amount of torture that I've indicated in terms of the long-term suffering that Mr. Ferguson, Timothy went through justifies on a reasonable grounds to depart from the guidelines.
She and Paul are unaware of the damage. They don't see it. How could you not see it? Because something's broken. There is Mr. Roberts' description of this offense. Nothing's inaccurate. Nothing he said do I disagree with. But I think you have to add in the part that something's wrong here.
The mother had to say this to him too as a child growing up, and so he's just parroting what she's been saying all along, and in her mind is unnecessary.
And not only unnecessary. I mean, she describes it almost like, and he does too in this situation, where it's like an offense. There's some crime that's been committed. And any of us, I guarantee you, anybody who's listening in, I mean, I've got 4 kids of my own, as many of you know. I mean, every one of my kids have gone and gotten food without asking me, or me thinking they're not going to, or they're not supposed to eat before dinner or whatever. And they do. And it is normal. But that's not at all the way it's presented here, or I think seen at all in this family.
Yeah. Just like when she testified about stealing the Easter candy.
Right. Yes. It was like a crime. And the district attorney here, Matt Roberts, he said, what crime did Timothy commit? Why are these crimes? He kept bringing that up, and he was hammering that home to the jury that it's not a crime to take food. It's not a crime to take batteries apart or to get into things. You know, what's interesting is when I looked at Paul Ferguson's Facebook from back in 2021 and 2022, he shows food quite a bit and him eating. Actually, he does live streaming. So he was eating like all different kinds of foods on his Facebook. So if the people in the chat have gone over to his Facebook, it's still on. It's public and you can view it. And in 2021, he said for his birthday, he wanted people to support the No Kid Go Hungry Foundation or something like that. Some of his Facebook here. This is just public. You know, anybody could see this. He has his dog. This is from 2021, February. More things. Always hungry. Warning: keep feeding at all times. This is December 2020. Just a bunch of posts of his dog. Him here with his dog on his shoulders. And here's the fundraiser that I was talking about. I don't know if you guys could see this. Let me put it full screen. So it says, for my birthday this year, I'm asking for donations. This is April 3rd of 2021 to the No Kid Hungry. I've chosen this nonprofit, and it's linked here. Fundraiser for No Kid Hungry by Paul Ferguson. Zero raised of $200, but he posted that April 3rd of 2021. And if you look at his feed, there's personal stuff. There's stuff of his younger brother playing t-ball, but here we got food. We got a sunburn. We got the mom with the dog.
I think the irony continues in the fact that he worked at a restaurant. He went to work at a restaurant.
Yeah.
So there is some kind of food dynamic here.
Yeah. And when you think about it, I mean, you think about how easy it would be as a parent to control using food. And, you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Psychology 101, talking about what food and shelter are the most primitive needs that we have. And kids are completely dependent, especially a special needs child is completely dependent upon their parents for food.
So my problem is this, if he gets a slap on the wrist and arguably gets out in 10 years, let's just say, I'm just throwing this out there. Say he does 10 years, good time, gets out, and is now 30 years old. Do we feel comfortable? I mean, this I know would have to be up to the professionals, but do you feel comfortable with a 30-year-old man now out into society again? And given the fact that he was this vulnerable to carry out these orders, I personally wouldn't feel safe with him next to my grandchildren or living next to my grandchildren. And that's just me. I'm just speaking out loud. Where do you draw the line with this? And we, as people that are true crime enthusiasts and such, we don't have access to his case file. We don't have access to his treatment records.
Something's wrong here. And even if we can't put a label on it, we all know it.
Accountability. Stop making excuses for bad behavior. Okay. Start teaching morals. Start teaching, what society expects of us as productive adults. Okay. Every action has a reaction. Every decision you make has consequences. Are you ready to deal with the consequences, whether it's good or bad? Okay. Stop making excuses.
Yeah. Amen to that, Ed. Amen to that. Got to hold these people accountable. Police department included. They came out to that home several double-digit times, and nothing was done. So we got to do better. We all have to realize that we have to do better. And
you had mentioned this idea of the Stockholm syndrome earlier, which I didn't realize, Ron, what you were talking about. What he was talking about. I don't know if you're familiar with the background of that, but Stockholm syndrome, you probably know that was from Sweden, when these bank robbers basically,
held hostages.
Held people hostage. And I mean, that seems there's a kind of a parallel there, isn't there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a hostage to his mother.
Exactly. And I think that really is kind of a parallel that becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly.
Yeah. And we hear all along in his testimony when the prosecutor was questioning him, which I'm not going to continue on with that, but you know, he goes on to talk about the restraints, the handcuffs, the zip ties that they bought on Amazon, and how his mom directed him to make it. He said Timothy was complaining that the cuffs were too tight and the zip ties were too tight.
Did there come a point in time where you became involved in having to administer some discipline to your younger brother, to Timothy?
Yes.
This is where he looks uncomfortable.
We'll talk about
now.
some specifics, but
looks over at her.
We have those text messages from January through the time of your brother's death in July of 2022. Is that your understanding?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things just jump out at me here. One being this idea of him disciplining his brother, who's a couple of years younger. Yes, he's got special needs, but we think about discipline as something a parent delivers. Number one, and number two, the way he talks about delivering this discipline, that his brother was sneaking food that wasn't necessary at this time. That doesn't sound like something a 19-year-old back then or a 21-year-old would say. I feel like I'm hearing somebody who's parroting back something that he's been told.
And she was also a dog trainer, and she used those techniques of positive reinforcement with treats on the dogs to train. And all I see is, I don't see humanity. I see just pure evil.
Yeah.
There's not a stitch of humanity in this person.
And for her to trigger you the way she triggered you, and you told me this from the get-go when we first started with this case.
Yeah, there's very few people who've done this to me in my life. I can honestly tell you, there's very few people.
What reasons could justify my actions? I could make up 1,000 and never believe one. What words could voice my regrets? I can think of millions, yet never feel it. If I could do it all again and do it right, I would. I feel I will pay for my choices and yet never feel better because he's still gone. I have had time to think during my time in Muskegon County Jail, and I've realized many things about myself that I might never have considered otherwise. My problems and flaws, to put it simply, are the place to begin correction of self. I asked the judge for nothing more than mercy and fairness, to offer me compassion so I might learn from him. I only hope to better myself in the coming days and serve my time with what little honor I have left, and to make right my faults in search of a better tomorrow.
And what I was looking at is whether or not this is a product of his mother or his situation, and what I can conclude is that this is not. Mr. Ferguson is trying to shift blame from his mother, from him to his mother, to say that somehow, well, if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have done this, or she's the one that did this. At the trial, well, at her order, he kept saying it over and over and over again as it just keep underscoring the point. And if that had been an isolated incident, if that had been one or two of these things, if that had been a punishment that he administered, maybe the court could accept that. But we have an individual who's in a household for 6 months, intentionally himself engaging in torture of another person. He had the ability to disobey his mom. In fact, he was on the stand and almost boasted that, well, I gave him extra food. Well, weren't you worried about how your mom was going to be upset? I still gave him extra food. So what that tells me is that this has been a careful, manipulated story by Mr. Ferguson from the very beginning of this thing, that he's going to put the blame on his mom. I'm going to be manipulated. I have Asperger's syndrome. I have autism. I have Stockholm syndrome. There's mention of him saying, well, maybe I have Stockholm syndrome in here. No, this is an individual. What the truth of this is that we have two individuals that lack empathy, who lack emotion, And both of them, the triggering factor in this report, the triggering factor that caused this abuse was the removal of the husband, of stepdad. Once he was gone, these two individuals were free to torture somebody, and they did it. That's what they did. And I think Ms. Vander Ark did use Mr. Ferguson. I think that she knew from his history that he was predisposed to torment Timothy. I think that she knew that he would have no problem doing that. And Mr. Ferguson walked through that door and was happy to be the enforcer, was happy to do it, and continued to torture his brother over and over and over and over until he was a shell of a person, until he was dead, died from starvation, died from hypothermia. He had no fat on him, barely any muscle on him. And the whole time, just letting it happen, letting it happen. The report says it appears that the stepfather's presence in the home had prevented Paul and his mother from abusing the victim. Again, it wasn't anything to do, they were just holding him back, essentially. In my opinion, although the defendant's participation in the abuse was in a part a function of his social milieu and living situation, these contextual factors were not a necessary condition for his participation. That while they were still living with their father and stepmother, and reportedly had no contact with their mother, Mr. Ferguson's stepmother told the psychiatrist that he has become bossy, telling his sibling what to do, and the defendant himself that he would become irritable. He gets physically aggressive, told his younger sibling, pushed them in retaliation. He's also tried to lock his younger brother, the decedent, in the closet because his brothers wouldn't listen to him. Consistent with this, Norton Shores Police Department documents indicate that Mr. Ferguson's stepsister told police that, quote, he is the biggest bully she's ever met in her life, and he found genuine joy in tormenting Timothy whenever possible when they were living in the biological father's home. Notably, the defendant allegedly engaged in this abusive behavior despite there being any safety rules in place, and despite his father and stepmother disapproving of this behavior to such an extent that they removed him from their home once he turned 18 because of it. In my opinion, Paul Ferguson was predisposed to abuse his brother independent of his mother's present and active influence in his life. Nonetheless, in my opinion, Mr. Ferguson's involvement in repeated acts of abuse that amounted to physical and psychological torture over a period of months reflects a general lack of empathy for his brother and a lack of remorse for his actions. It concludes that, in my opinion, there is no reason to believe that Mr. Ferguson's conduct disorder has remitted or that his participation in the abuse of his brother was not an expression of a persistent pattern of antisocial conduct. The court is concerned that Mr. Ferguson will not get the help he needs in prison. I think he's one step away from becoming a psychopath like his mother. And the court is concerned that he represents a danger to the public. That if released, he would represent a significant danger to the public. The charge here is child abuse. And I don't think this charge or the sentencing guidelines take into adequate consideration of the long sustained torture in this case, as there was a long period of months, various punishments, including bread with hot sauce that apparently contains 2 of the hottest peppers that we have in the world, wall sits for an individual who practically had no muscle left, cleaning out a garage with no pants on, sleep deprivation in itself, putting alarms on him so he couldn't move or sleep, being him puke up food. There's bathroom timers, sleeping in the closet with a tarp down, which quite frankly might be considered animal abuse. But we have a human being here, making his hands over his head, and then at the end of his life, an 8-hour practically ice bath that killed him. So no, I don't think any of those things are adequately taken into consideration by the guidelines. And I don't think the guidelines, quite frankly, these guidelines don't justify Mr. Ferguson's actions. Mr. Ferguson, I think you are a product of your environment, but I don't believe you that you're sorry. I don't think you have empathy. I don't think you have any emotion whatsoever. And that's what scares the court. It really scares me. I think you're sorry that you're here. I think you're sorry you got caught. I don't think you wanted Tim to die either, like your mother, because you would get caught and you wouldn't torture him anymore. And believe me, I have tried to sit here and try to think, well, maybe Mr. Ferguson's not as bad as Mom. I think you're just as bad, if not worse. If not worse. Because you had a job. You could have, Mr. Johnson actually asked you, couldn't you have brought home a thing of food for him? You could have gone to a neighbor and said, hey, my mom's abusing him. You could have grabbed him and got him out of there. You could have done any number of things to stop this, and you chose not to. Your own brother. And this is where we're at. So, based on all that, it's a sentence of the court. You serve 30 years to 100 years, Michigan Department of Corrections. Credit for 592 days you've already served. Court's going to assess a $68 state cost.
Did his due diligence. I got to give him credit. He read through all of those text messages, thousands of text messages, those reports, really took it home and sealed his fate.
I've been saying all along, and I took a lot of heat, Ed, that Paul Ferguson is a danger to society. I proposed to our audience on several different occasions, would you want Paul Ferguson living next to you if he got out in a year or 5 years or 10 years? And my answer to that was hands down, no. Timothy died July 6, 2022. This sentence is just. This sentence was fair. This sentence is what was needed, in my opinion. Let us know in the chat.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. After finding all these terrible things about him in those two reports. So yeah, 100%.
Not only looked at by one, but two doctors. And did you see the look on his face, Ed?
Oh my God, yes. When his head popped up. But you know me. I follow the evidence. Wherever the evidence is taking me, that's where I'm going to go. And the evidence now is clear that we didn't have that. And you know who else didn't have it? The district attorney didn't have that evidence about him before he kind of came up with that deal. Paul should have been evaluated before the mother's trial, not after the mother's trial. So that the district attorney could have had that information before he started, into a deal with Paul for his testimony. Thank God it worked out. Justice was served here with the proper sentence.